The Diary of Dr. X, Episode 13. How Classism Can Disguise Racial Prejudice. Found a cigar on the street today. There was a lot of discussion in the local media in November 2010 of City Hall's concerns regarding people who panhandle on boulevards or squeegee in traffic for pocket change here in the city of Winnipeg. They were considering making it a criminal offense. In fact, this included the Winnipeg Sun's coverage on Tuesday, November 16th, 2010, which I refer to below. The Winnipeg Sun is a conservative rag, basically. Strangely enough, the working class tends to read it too, despite the fact that its politics are so incredibly and obviously at odds with their own best interests. That's not unusual either. It's referred to as cultural hegemony in the anthropological literature. This refers to the fact that the underclasses are basically brainwashed into defending the right of the ruling class to exploit them by the CCCP media. I assume in this case, they also read The Sun, both because it is cheaper than the more liberal Winnipeg Free Press and because of the daily scantily clad Sunshine Girl it features in its tabloid format. Of course, I enjoy them too. But someone with direct knowledge of the issue needs to comment to the world given the situation, even so long after the fact. Why? Because the attitudes displayed, particularly towards the poor, are so incredibly typical of our society generally. In fact, they are endemic. You see, I'm a social scientist, as you know. I have spent quite some time studying the culture of the street people in the Osborne Village area here in town. As a cultural anthropologist, I use our usual methodology, participant observation, as I mentioned previously. What this means is you attempt to live like and fit in with the people you study in order to learn to understand their culture from the inside to the greatest degree possible. So there is no part-time teaching or manual labor job available. I spend 6 to 8 hours per day walking the streets of the Osborne Village where I live, looking for beer cans, cigarette butts, and change dropped in the street. Not without reason either, as EI, employment insurance, barely covers my rent and child support. A fact that I always am honest about with the other street people. And those of you who have been following already know all of this stuff, but for those who aren't, I repeat it. Needless to say, I've gotten to know the other street people in the area fairly well. They have come to know me as Dr. X, as most people who participate in the street economy use aliases. These include the buskers, the squeegee people, the panhandlers, some of whom do work on the boulevard from time to time in this area, and the other urban scavengers like myself. Now, the issue, particularly for people like Mr. Broadbeck in The Sun, obviously had nothing to do with public safety, which is how they spun it when they discussed it in their crappy little paper. After all, as Mr. Broadbeck so aptly suggested, and I quote, "Sooner or later someone is going to end up on the wrong side of a Goodyear radio, and it won't be the driver." Like he was really concerned. Indeed, The Sun itself supported Mr. Broadbeck's editorial opinions with a banner headline calling such people, in his words, a blight on our city, with a reference to his article on the front page. So given the language he and his publisher used to describe these people, many of whom are my friends, they obviously couldn't care less if they are harmed in traffic-related incidents and should stop pretending that they do. So what's the real issue? I can tell you in a word. Prejudice, specifically against the poor. You see, our politically correct society prides itself on condemning prejudice based on one's race, ethnicity, gender, age, or sexual preference. But social class? Sorry, if you are poor, it is still perfectly fine for people like Mr. Broadbeck, supposedly an award-winning columnist in the advertisements on the radio, to describe you in print as ugly, smelly, slimy, or as animals who will probably pee on your headlights, to quote this redneck personally. In the rich Western societies, you see, we don't like to be reminded that our lifestyle is purchased on the backs of the poor. After all, from a scientific perspective, there are simply not enough resources in the world for everyone to live the affluent lifestyle that this minority enjoys. Not possible. Is there enough food to feed everyone? Sure, always has been. You can check UN statistics for yourself if you want to look up stats on their website. Starvation is a distribution issue. Food goes to those with the money, not those in need. And those who have the money can waste as much of it as they see fit, either by directly throwing it in the garbage, as is not uncommon, or through obesity, which is probably far more common. But are there enough resources for everyone on the planet to own a Beamer, a 3-car garage in the suburbs, and 2.4 HD televisions? Not on your life! And there is never likely to be from a scientific perspective, given current population and consumption levels. What this implies is the uncomfortable truth that poverty for the majority is built into the functioning of our global social system, so long as a minority believes that it is their right to consume more than their fair share based on no more entitlement than their purchasing power, which is what most middle class and above people do in the West. This is why we prefer this truth to be hidden, by keeping poverty far away from us in the third world where it belongs. We also prefer any charity towards such people to be handled through intermediaries who can make a living by taking their percentage before the poor actually get anything. Yet when poverty is observed closer to home, what do? Suggest social programs that will help to deal with these people's poverty? No, not in this situation anyways. Instead, we condemn them, and we invoke committees to study how best to criminalize their behavior, as Winnipeg City Council did in this situation. One commentator in this issue of The Sun even suggested that criminalizing the act of giving money directly to the poor in this situation was an appropriate solution, rather than criminalizing the act of asking for money on the boulevard or in the street. And what is the implication of that? Direct charity to the poor would become a criminal offense. Man! The intermediaries have to get their cut first! Let's be honest. The behavior in question of these people is really nothing more than impromptu entrepreneurial behavior on the part of law-abiding citizens with little or nothing to invest but their time in an attempt to make an honest living by squeegeeing or panhandling. Fine, they're doing it in the street or on the boulevard. But those are both far better than selling crack or meth or heroin, or better yet, turning to crimes such as armed robbery to raise some cash, now aren't they? These are by and large, basically poor but good and non-violent people who look for non-harmful ways to make themselves a living. Just like me with my scavenging, which is ecologically useful since it diverts resources out of the landfill and into recycling where they belong. So let's look a little deeper into the issue in the local context. And let's not forget the context in which these issues were being discussed, because what it disguises is something far uglier than prejudice against the poor. This is Winnipeg we're talking about, Winnipeg, Manitoba. And please recall two things about the demographics of this city and its residents, of which you may not be aware. First, that it has the highest percentage of Aboriginal residents of any major city in the country of Canada. Second, that the Aboriginal population makes up a disproportionate share of the poor or lower class members of society due to ongoing systemic prejudice against them in the labor market. Well, you're late. What this implies is that a disproportionate percentage of the population of panhandlers and other street people are also Native American, which is certainly true based on my research in the Osborne Village area. And I can remember a time, not so long ago, when people just like Mr. Broadbeck and the other rednecks like him spoke openly of dirty, smelly Indians in the same way he and others now speak of panhandlers, many of whom are, surprise, surprise, Native Americans. Yet now, people like Mr. Broadbeck and his other redneck friends use the media to hide this prejudice behind the acceptable prejudice against those who are poor. Partly by never including a Native American in the cover and supporting photographs of panhandlers they provided to support these stories, despite their obvious prominence in this city. After all, everyone knows, as Mr. Broadbeck is fond of informing us, that poverty is the fault of the poor. That, to quote Mr. Broadbeck, most of them should be working anyways. And of course, this implies that poverty is not an inevitable product of the normal operation of the capitalist system, right? I guess this asshole has never heard of an unemployment rate of 8 to 10%, a consistent unemployment rate of 8 to 10%. Nor has he ever heard of how this guarantees that many people will always remain unemployed, or how it is useful in keeping wages down. In any case, I know of a group of Native American squeegee workers who would like to lynch Mr. Broadbeck given his comments. Spoke to them around this time this happened. Why? Because to them, as to myself, the racist implications are more than obvious. Because we've all seen them before. But sadly, racism remains perfectly acceptable in our society as long as you can spin your arguments to target the poor, since classism is not considered hate propaganda. Quite the contrary. In our society, it is the norm. No cheers to that.